I'm Nathan, a 42-year-old architect from the suburbs of Santa Clara, California. My life, at least from the outside, seems perfect. A big house with a lush yard, a beautiful wife named Emily, and a lovely 12-year-old daughter, Diana. But what people don't know is that underneath that perfect facade, things are slowly crumbling, like a building with a damaged foundation that I'm not ready to fix. Emily and I have been married for 15 years. At first, our marriage was filled with love and passion, but gradually the pressures of work and family life took their toll. I often worked late, not because I didn't want to go home, but because I felt that work was the only place where I could have control. Emily, a smart and sharp woman, gave up her career to raise our family, but I always felt that she was never truly satisfied with that choice. The cracks in our relationship became more apparent when Carlos arrived. Carlos was a young man, only about 27, our new gardener. Emily had hired him through a friend to take care of our large garden, her greatest pride. Carlos had a charming smile, a tan, and a confident demeanor. He quickly integrated himself into our daily life, chatting with Emily about plants and flowers, and sometimes joking with Diana when she went out to play. To be honest, I didn't like Carlos at first. He had a cockiness that made me uncomfortable, but I had no reason to doubt him. Plus, Emily seemed to enjoy his work. She often complimented Carlos on how he tended the garden and even made him a drink on hot days. I thought it was just politeness, until I started noticing small changes in Emily's behavior. Emily gradually became more distant from me. She stopped asking about my work or the projects I was working on. Instead, she spent more time in the yard, talking to Carlos. I also noticed how she took more care with her appearance. New dresses, new hairstyles, and a perfume I had never smelled before. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that it was just my insecurity about seeing a younger man near my wife. Diana also noticed a change in her mother. One evening, while I was working in my room, she came in and asked, "Dad, are Mom and Carlos close friends? I see Mom talking to him more than she does to you." Her question left me speechless. I just smiled and answered evasively, but inside I was starting to feel worried. I decided to take a closer look. One Saturday afternoon, while I was pretending to be busy in the garage, I overheard Emily and Carlos talking in the backyard. They were laughing, and I heard Emily say something that I will never forget. "If you weren't a gardener, you would be doing a lot of great things." Carlos just laughed and said something back that I couldn't quite make out, but the way they talked made me uncomfortable. Over the next few days, I started to notice more. Carlos would often stay after work to help Emily water her plants, and Emily always seemed happier when he was there. It was all happening right before my eyes, but I didn't know how to deal with it. Life went on, but a growing doubt grew within me. I realized that over the years, I had missed out on a lot. I hadn't noticed how lonely Emily felt when I was so focused on work. I also hadn't realized how bland and distant our relationship had become. One evening, while Emily and I were having dinner, I tried to talk about my feelings. I asked her if she was happy. Emily just looked at me for a moment, then said, "I'm fine, Nathan. Don't worry about it." But her eyes said otherwise. They didn't have the light I used to love. I began to feel like an outsider in my own family. Diana, though young, could sense the tension. She played more by herself or ran off to play with her friends next door. I didn't want to admit that I was losing Emily, but all the signs pointed to it. Carlos, meanwhile, seemed to grow more confident. He no longer kept his distance from me, instead appearing falsely friendly. One time, while I was in the backyard, he came up to me and said, "You have a wonderful family, Nathan. Emily is a special woman." I just smiled and nodded, but inside I felt like I had been stabbed. Finally, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let things fall into chaos. I knew that if I wanted to save my family, or at least find out the truth, I had to act. But I didn't know then that I was about to embark on a battle filled with hatred, heartache, and lessons I would never forget. Our 15th wedding anniversary was supposed to be a special occasion for us. I had planned it for weeks. I'd leave the office early, bring a bouquet of Emily's favorite roses, and make reservations at the restaurant where we dined on our first date. But life rarely goes according to plan, especially when you don't see it coming. I drove home earlier than usual that day, trying to surprise Emily. On the way home, I even imagined how radiantly she would smile when I walked in with the flowers in my hand. But when I pulled into the garage, I noticed something was wrong. Carlos's truck was parked right outside the gate, which was unusual at this hour. He usually finished work around 4 p.m., and it was already 6 p.m. When I entered the house, everything seemed normal. Diana was in her bedroom, doing her homework. I called Emily's name, but there was no answer. I quietly went out to the backyard, where there was a greenhouse, where Emily often spent time tending to her favorite orchids. And then I heard laughter. The laughter was not that of someone simply making small talk. It had an intimate, familiar quality to it, something I hadn't heard from Emily in years. My heart beat faster as I approached the greenhouse. I tried to walk as quietly as possible, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the frosted glass, I saw Emily and Carlos. They were standing so close that there was no mistaking them. Emily held a small potted plant in her hand, pointing at it, but her eyes were not on the plant. They were both laughing, and Carlos suddenly touched her hand lightly, then left his there. It was not by chance. I stood there, unable to look away. The sight was like a blow to my pride. All my doubts were answered. Without further words or actions, I understood what was happening. But instead of rushing in, screaming, or doing anything impulsive, I backed away. In that moment, a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was because I was in shock, or maybe it was because I knew I needed to think carefully. I didn't want to destroy everything at once, didn't want to create a scene that would hurt Diana. I knew I needed proof, needed a plan. My mind had begun to function like an architect designing a building. I needed every detail to be precise, every step to be perfect. But inside, the pain was burning. Every heartbeat felt like a knife stabbing deep. I went back into the house, trying to look as normal as possible. Diana poked her head out of her room and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" I tried to smile, nodded toward the backyard, and told her that Mommy was tending the flowers. She went back into her room, unaware of the tension that was wrapping me like an invisible rope. I walked into my office, closed the door, and sat down in my usual leather chair. My mind was in turmoil, but one thought was clear. I needed proof. This wasn't just about my own trauma. If things went too far, I had to protect Diana from the consequences. Emily needed to be held accountable, and I needed to face the truth before making any decisions. I checked the security camera system of the house. I had installed some cameras outside for security, but none of them recorded what was happening in the greenhouse or the backyard. I quickly searched online and ordered a small hidden camera, enough to record all the activity in that area without anyone noticing. Next day delivery was promised. The beauty of living in an area close to the tech hub. The next day I woke up earlier than usual and greeted Emily as if nothing had happened. She still looked calm, but I no longer saw the woman I'd married 15 years ago. I saw only a distorted picture, a well-covered lie. It hurt, but it also made me more determined. While Emily was dropping Diana off at school, I quickly went out to the backyard and set up the new camera in the greenhouse. I chose a hidden corner where I could cover the entire space without being easily spotted. It took me less than 30 minutes to complete the job, but it felt like it took forever. Images from the day before kept playing over and over in my head like a broken old movie. That day, I went to work as usual, but I couldn't concentrate. All I could think about was checking the camera when I got home. That night, after Emily and Diana had gone to bed, I quietly opened my laptop and reviewed the footage. At first, it was just innocent scenes. Carlos pruning plants, Emily helping him carry some flower pots. But then, after about an hour, things changed. They stood closer, talked more. Carlos put his hand on Emily's shoulder, and she didn't flinch. Her laughter rang out. While I sat there, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails almost dug into my skin. I kept watching, and by the time the video ended, I had no more doubts. This was no longer imagination or baseless speculation. This was the truth, the harsh truth that I never thought I would have to face. I sat there in the dark, the only light coming from my laptop screen illuminating my face. The feeling I had at that moment was hard to describe. Pain, anger, but also a surprising calm. I realized that this was only the first step. Knowing the truth was just the beginning. Now, I had to decide what to do with it. The next morning, as Emily prepared breakfast, I tried to keep up appearances. I even made small talk with Carlos when he arrived at work, if only briefly. Inside, I was plotting. I needed more time, more evidence, and most of all, a strategy to ensure things would go the way I wanted. As Carlos walked out onto the field, Emily watched him with an unfocused gaze, as if his presence were the most important thing in the day. I said nothing, just stared at her silently, wondering when she'd changed. I didn't know the answer, but it didn't matter anymore. The only thing I knew for sure was that things would never be the same between us. It didn't take long for things to escalate. Just a few days after I set up the cameras, my first chance to confront Emily and Carlos came. Emily wanted to throw a small party at her house, inviting a few close friends and neighbors. The official reason was to celebrate the summer, but I suspected it was just an excuse to spend more time with Carlos. Emily had asked him to help prepare the yard for the party, a task that I thought was unnecessary. I agreed to the party plan, but this time I decided not to stay out of it. I prepared everything for the inevitable confrontation. That evening, our garden was ablaze with string lights strung around the trees, and the tables and chairs were elegantly arranged. The laughter of the guests echoed throughout, and Emily moved between the groups with a glass of wine in her hand, beaming as if this was the most perfect party of her life. Carlos was there too, but he wasn't wearing his usual gardening clothes. Instead, he was wearing a crisp shirt and jeans, looking like one of the guests. Throughout the party, I tried to remain calm, but my tension kept rising. Every move, every look between Emily and Carlos felt like an invisible knife was stabbing me in the heart. I watched them from a distance, taking in every little detail, but also kept a carefree appearance, as if I didn't notice anything. As the party wound down, I saw Carlos standing alone in the corner of the backyard, as if waiting for someone. Emily appeared shortly after, a glass of wine in her hand. They were talking, standing closer than necessary. I walked over, pretending to run into them. "Carlos, are you still here?" "I thought the job was done," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to get their attention. Carlos was startled, but quickly regained his composure. "I was just taking a break, Nathan. The party was great. Emily did a great job." "Yeah, she's always been good at organizing things," I replied, looking straight at Emily. She said nothing, just clutched her glass of wine in her hand, looking confused. Not wanting to cause a scene in front of the guests, I decided to keep quiet. But my eyes certainly sent a clear message. I knew, and I wasn't going to let things go on like this forever. That night, after the guests had left, I went into my office, turned on my camera, and watched the entire party. It was clearer than ever. They were more than just being intimate. The bond between Emily and Carlos went far beyond a casual relationship. This was more than a betrayal. It was an insult to me, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a clear determination. This was not going to happen again. Emily acted as usual, smiling good morning and setting up breakfast for Diana. She didn't notice that I was sitting across from her, watching her every move. The way she avoided eye contact when Carlos came up in conversation was the clearest sign. Around mid-morning, I got a text from Carlos, something I didn't expect. "Nathan, we need to talk. Meet me in the backyard shed at noon." I read the message and smiled faintly. So he felt threatened, or perhaps thought he could talk me out of it. Whatever the reason, I decided to confront him. Not to make a deal, but to put my plan into action. At the appointed time, I went out to the backyard, where Carlos was waiting in the shed, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He looked nervous, but tried to maintain a confident facade. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning against the warehouse doorframe. "Nathan," Carlos began, his voice soft, "I don't want this to be awkward. I really respect you and your family. If there's anything you're misunderstanding, Misunderstanding? I interrupted, my voice cold. "Do you think I'm an idiot who doesn't know anything?" Carlos paused, his eyes suddenly filled with confusion. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. "I don't want to cause trouble. We were just talking, nothing serious," he said, but his tone was no longer steady. I stepped into the warehouse, closing the door behind me to make sure no one could hear our conversation. Carlos took a step back, perhaps realizing that I was no longer keeping up appearances. "Just talking? You think I'd believe that after what I saw?" I took a step forward, forcing Carlos back against the wall. "You think I don't know what you're doing behind my back. Carlos raised his hand as if to calm the situation. Nathan, listen, I don't want any problems with you. If you want, I'll leave. I won't work here anymore. Leave? I sneered. Do you think it's that simple? Unable to contain my anger, I grabbed the shovel propped up in the corner of the shed and threw it to the ground right in front of Carlos. The sound of metal hitting cement made him jump. I could do more, Carlos, but I won't. Not for you, but for my daughter. You better watch out, because I won't let anyone destroy my family without paying the price. Carlos didn't reply, just looked at me with a tense gaze. The confrontation ended when I turned and walked out of the warehouse, leaving him standing there, clearly shaken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Emily, listening to her steady breathing. I wondered how this woman, whom I had loved for 15 years, could betray me so easily. But the answer didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was how I was going to handle this. I knew I couldn't solve everything by getting angry and confronting. This was a battle I had to win, and I wasn't going to let any temporary emotions derail my plans. I needed to keep observing, gather more evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The next morning, when Carlos came to work, I didn't even look at him. Emily acted normal, not noticing any change in me. But I was different. I was no longer the Nathan they knew, the quiet man who tried to keep things together. I had decided this would be their last game, and I would make the rules. Once I had calmed down and thought things through, I began to make a plan. In my 42 years of life, I had learned that haste leads to mistakes. I didn't need to get angry or get carried away by emotions. If Emily and Carlos thought they had the situation under control, they were wrong. I began by learning more about Carlos. With the help of a private investigator I hired through a friend, I got a detailed profile of him. It turned out that Carlos was not as simple as he appeared. Before coming to work in the area, he had a misdemeanor conviction for fraud in another state. This immediately sparked an idea for an elaborate revenge strategy. I didn't just want to expose Emily's betrayal, I wanted to make Carlos pay. I started downloading all the videos from the security cameras installed in the greenhouse. These images clearly showed the shady relationship between Emily and Carlos. I carefully edited them into a short but powerful video that would clarify the whole story. This would not only be my evidence, but also my weapon for future use. I didn't stop there. One morning while Emily was dropping Diana off at school, I snuck a peek at her phone. As I'd expected, the messages between her and Carlos were filled with intimate comments, dates I didn't know about. I took pictures of every message and saved them to my personal hard drive. Each one was a stab to my pride, but they were what I needed to make sure Emily couldn't escape responsibility. I turned my attention to Carlos. Armed with information about his past as a scammer, I set out to set a trap. I asked a friend, Greg, who worked in law, to approach Carlos under the guise of a lucrative job offer, tending the gardens of a large suburban estate at double his current salary. Greg posed as a wealthy businessman looking to hire an experienced gardener. Carlos no doubt was interested. What Carlos didn't know, however, was that Greg had also carefully prepared a fake file containing information about Carlos's past illegal activities. This file was sent to the local immigration office along with an anonymous complaint. I knew that one more step and Carlos would be investigated and there would be no way out. With everything sorted, I knew it was time to confront Emily, but I didn't want a simple kitchen argument. I needed a meeting she couldn't avoid. I decided to host a family dinner, with Diana and Greg in attendance. Everything was perfect, from the food to the wine to the atmosphere. As the evening progressed, I tried to keep things casual. Greg played the role of funny friend, telling stories that made Diana laugh, but my eyes never left Emily. She looked uncomfortable, as if she sensed something was wrong. After dinner, I poured more wine and invited Emily to stay and talk to me privately. Diana went up to the bedroom, and Greg politely left, leaving her and me alone. Emily, I began, my voice calm but cold. We need to talk. She put down her glass, her eyes wavering. About what? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took out my laptop and opened the video I'd edited. For a few short minutes, Emily stared at the images I had collected. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. You followed me? She stuttered, trying to find the words to justify herself. Don't tell me you misunderstood, I replied, my voice as sharp as a knife. It's clear. You betrayed me, Emily. Not just me, but Diana too. Emily burst into tears, but I didn't let her interrupt. Do you know how this will affect Diana? Have you thought about her, or are you just thinking about yourself? She said nothing, just sat there, her hands covering her face. Emily collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. I stood there, looking at her as if the woman I'd loved for the past 15 years was a stranger. The air in the room was thick. The only sound was Emily's sobs. I know everything, Emily, I continued, my voice calm but cold. I know about the texts, the meetings, the way you sneak around behind my back. Stop denying it. I don't know what to say. Emily stuttered, trying to come up with an excuse, but no excuses came out of her mouth. I didn't mean to hurt you. Not on purpose. I laughed, a dry, sarcastic laugh. You didn't mean it when you let Carlos touch you in the greenhouse? You didn't mean it when you texted him every night while I was in the office? Don't insult my intelligence, Emily. She bowed her head, not daring to look straight at me. The prolonged silence made me feel more disgusted than the lies. I didn't say anything more to Emily right then. I needed to save my energy for the next step in my plan, dealing with Carlos. The next morning, as usual, Carlos came to work in the backyard. I stood in the kitchen, watching him through the window. He still looked confident, as if everything was under his control. But he didn't know that Greg had sent Carlos a fake file to immigration the night before, along with a report that he was working illegally and was involved in fraudulent activities. A few days later, I got a call from Greg. They've started an investigation, Nathan. I think Carlos will hear from them soon. Sure enough, within a week, Carlos was summoned to work with the authorities. I heard Emily on the phone with a friend that Carlos was very confused, worried about being deported. That was the first step in my plan. I wanted him to know that his life was no longer safe. After making sure that Carlos was in crisis, I decided to confront Emily again. This time, I wanted her to understand the consequences of her betrayal. I left a copy of the video I edited on the dining table, along with all the messages between her and Carlos. When Emily got home, she saw them immediately. She picked up the USB and turned to me with red eyes. What are you going to do with these? Emily asked, her voice trembling. It's up to you, Emily, I said, my voice even. I can keep quiet for Diana's sake, but if you continue to contact Carlos or try to protect him, I will not hesitate to send these to the court when we divorce. And believe me, you will have no chance of keeping Diana. Emily was devastated. She tried to say that she was cutting all contact with Carlos, that she wanted to make things right, but I didn't believe her anymore, and she knew it. When immigration began deporting Carlos, he tried to reach out to Emily for help. I know this from one of the messages I secretly monitored. Emily, in a last-ditch effort to save herself, refused to meet with him, probably out of fear that I would find out. The day Carlos was arrested, I saw the police take him away right in front of my house. He looked at me through the window, his eyes full of hatred, but I just stood there, not saying a word. I didn't feel satisfied or victorious. Revenge didn't bring joy, only relief. But I knew that what I did was necessary, not because I wanted to destroy Emily or Carlos, but because I needed to protect Diana and save my dignity. Just when it seemed like everything was over, Emily and Carlos proved that they weren't done messing up my life again. I didn't expect that, after all that had happened, they would still be stupid enough to try to fight back. But that stupidity only made things worse for them. One evening, as I was sitting in my study, Diana came running in, phone in hand. Dad, someone sent me a text message. I don't know who it is. I took the phone from her. The message was from an unknown number and read, Diana, your mother still loves your father, but he's making things difficult. If you want to help her, let me know when he's away. I felt anger rise up in me immediately. Just reading a message like that, I knew it was Carlos. Not only had he violated my boundaries, but he had also brought Diana into this. That was unforgivable. I told Diana not to reply to the text, and made sure she understood not to say anything to people like Carlos. I'll take care of it, honey. Don't worry. She nodded and went back to her room, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The next evening, when I got home, Emily was waiting for me at the door. She rarely showed up unannounced since we separated, so I knew this was no coincidence. Do you have time to talk? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Depends on what you mean, I replied, keeping my demeanor cool. Emily sighed. stepping into the house without waiting for my invitation. Carlos contacted me, she began. He said you were trying to ruin his life. He was threatened by what you were doing. I chuckled. So, who do you think ruined who first, Emily? I just gave him what he deserved. You've done enough, Nathan, she said, her voice rising. Carlos has nothing left. He lost his job, was kicked out of his home, and now you're putting him on the run from the authorities. Don't you think that's too much? I stepped closer to Emily, looking her straight in the eye. Too much? I growled. Emily, he destroyed our family. He used you. He used my trust. And now you're siding with him? Do you think you have the right to tell me anything that's enough? Emily backed away, but she tried to continue. Carlos didn't deserve to be treated like that. He was just what? I interrupted. Just a liar? An adulterer? Someone who dragged our daughter into this? Can't you see that you're the one who put this family in this situation? She was silent, tears streaming down her face, but I no longer felt pity or heartache. I just felt empty. Emily left right after the conversation, but I knew this wasn't the end. Part of me felt that Carlos wouldn't give up easily, and Emily, in her desperation, might continue to help him. I decided to set another trap. I asked Greg to pretend to contact Emily, offering to help Carlos escape from the authorities. Greg said he could arrange for false papers in a safe haven, but only if they paid a large sum of money up front. As I expected, Emily immediately agreed. She secretly withdrew money from her personal account, which I easily detected through the joint financial system we used as a couple. The money was then transferred to Greg, and we kept all the evidence of this behavior. A week later, Greg arranged a fake deal between Carlos and a person posing as an immigration official. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse where Carlos was arrested on the spot for violating immigration laws and attempting to use false documents. Emily was not present, but that did not absolve her of responsibility. When everything was reported to me, I sent all the evidence of Emily's involvement in helping Carlos to my lawyer. This became the deciding factor in the divorce trial, where I won full custody of Diana without further argument. Emily couldn't hide for long. After Carlos was arrested at the fake deal, my attorney introduced evidence of her involvement in the plan to help him escape into court. This not only completely destroyed Emily's image in court, but also cost her any chance of seeing Diana in the near future. The day I received notice from my attorney that I had been granted full custody, I didn't feel as happy as I thought I would. Instead, I felt relief. Relief that I had finally protected Diana from the chaos that Emily and Carlos had caused. When I told Emily about the verdict, she completely broke down. "Nathan, please, I can't lose my baby," she cried, kneeling before me. But I just stood there, looking at her. "Emily," I said, my voice cold. "You had your chance to make amends, but you chose to betray and make the same mistake again. This isn't just Carlos's fault. This is your choice." She didn't respond. She just sat there, head down, sobbing. Carlos, meanwhile, was out of luck. Charged with fraud, immigration violations, and false documents, he was deported after his hearing. I heard he returned home empty-handed, with no support. His days of gardening in suburban California were now a distant dream. I don't care much about him anymore. To me, Carlos is just a variable in this story. A variable that I have successfully eliminated. After everything that happened, the most important thing for me was to make sure Diana had a peaceful life. I tried my best to make it up to her, taking her out on the weekends, participating in school activities, and always making sure she felt loved. One evening, when I took Diana out for ice cream, she suddenly asked, "Daddy, does Mom hate me? I don't want to make her sad, but I don't want to leave you either." I stopped, bent down, and took her hand. "No one hates you, Diana. Your mother made a mistake, but it wasn't your fault. I'm here to make sure you're happy and safe, okay?" She nodded, and I saw a relieved smile on her face. That was all I needed. Emily moved to a small apartment in the suburbs, working part-time at a convenience store. She almost cut off contact with everyone around her, not daring to face the judgment of the community. Once a month, she emails me, asking about Diana, but I rarely respond. I don't want her to think she has a chance to come back into our lives. One day, I received a handwritten letter from Emily, something she hadn't done since we broke up. The short content: "Nathan, I know how much I have hurt you and Diana. I don't ask for forgiveness, but I just want to say that I'm sorry. If I could go back, I would never have chosen this path. I hope you will take good care of Diana, as I know you always have. Emily. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Maybe someday I would forgive her, but today wasn't that day. Emily and Carlos's foolish resistance not only pushed them to their limits, but also made the value of honesty and self-respect clearer. In the end, they had to face the consequences of their own making, while Diana and I started our lives from the broken pieces that remained. Carlos, after being deported, returned home to Mexico with nothing. I didn't spend much time thinking about him, but a friend of mine found his social media account and sent me some information. Carlos tried to rebuild his life in his home country, but his past as a scammer and his mistakes did not let him go. He was shunned by the community there after the truth about his scams in the US spread. His social media posts, initially full of confidence and bragging, gradually became lamentations and pleas for help. Not long after that, I heard that Carlos was blackmailed by another group of con men and robbed of the little money he had earned. Some people call it karma, and I can't say I disagree. Emily lost not only her family, but also her reputation. Our community was small, and news of our divorce spread quickly. People who had been her friends gradually drifted away, avoiding Emily's name as a stain. She moved to another town, trying to rebuild her life, but it wasn't easy. Her part-time job at a convenience store helped her get by, but every time she had a hard time, she would come back to email me. One time, Emily texted that she wanted to see Diana, but after all that had happened, Diana refused. She had grown a lot over the years, and she understood that her mother had put selfishness above the happiness of the family. "I don't hate you, Mom," Diana told me one night, after getting an email from Emily, "but I don't want to see you right now. I don't know what to say." I didn't force her. I understood that Diana needed time to heal, and that she probably wouldn't want to look back on that painful past for the rest of her life. The hardest part of this journey wasn't facing Emily or Carlos. It was learning to forgive myself for not recognizing the warning signs sooner, for letting Diana endure the turmoil in her family. But I refused to dwell on the past. Instead, I focused on building a better future for Diana. I moved to a new architecture firm in San Francisco, where I could work more flexibly to spend time with my daughter. I attended school events, took Diana to camp, and gradually we found joy in the little things in life. One day, Diana suddenly asked, "Dad, do you hate Mom?" I thought for a moment before answering. "No, I don't hate your mother. I'm just sad that she made bad choices. But sometimes those bad choices help us understand our values and what's really important." The little girl smiled, as if she had finally found the answer she was looking for. This story, to me, is more than just a journey of revenge or retribution. It is a lesson in self-respect, in honesty, and in holding on to your values even when everything falls apart. Emily and Carlos destroyed their lives with bad decisions, but from that chaos, Diana and I found a new path. We learned to trust each other, to love and protect what really matters. There will be days when I think of Emily, but not with resentment. I think of her as a part of my life that was lost, a costly but necessary lesson, and I hope that wherever she is, she learns her lesson. I watched Diana grow, watched her become stronger and more confident. I knew that despite our loss, we had found peace, and to me, that was all that mattered.